Right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this Natural Capital Initiative NCI event. For those of you who are new, the NCI is a partnership of three organisations: the Royal Society of Biology, the UK Centre for Ecology and Hyrdrology, and the James Hutton Institute. The NCI's mission is to support decision-making that results in the sustainable management of our natural capital. My name's Kieran Wolf, and I'm part of the science policy team at the Royal Society of Biology. Our event today is on the topic of embedding natural capital in the built environment and how we can protect and improve the benefits natural capital has in our towns and cities. This is something, of course, that's very relevant at the moment, given ambitious infrastructure building plans that are in place at the moment in government policy, as well as addressing the ongoing issues we have of biodiversity loss and changing environmental conditions as a result of climate change, and how these are going to impact where we live and what buildings we live in, etc. So with that said, I'm delighted to be joined by three speakers today who are going to share their perspectives and insights on these topics. After that, we'll open up to a wider Q&A, so please do put your questions into the Q&A box during the talks, and then we'll answer them or get through as many as possible as we can at the end. You can ask your question anonymously if you wish. You just have to tick the anonymous box when you submit your question. One final note is to note this event will be recorded, and the recording will be put up on YouTube and the NCI website once recording is taking place. There'll also be a survey that you can answer, giving your perspectives on this event at the end, and we would encourage you to fill that in. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. This is Stuart Connop, who is a professor in sustainability and director of the Sustainability Research Institute at the University of East London. So, Stuart, whenever you're ready, go ahead. Thanks. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Stuart.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Good start. So I clicked unmute, but for some reason it didn't unmute. Hopefully that's better now. Let me just get
that's fine.
Presentation into presentation mode. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Yeah, as Kieran said, I'm Stuart Connop. I'm the director of the Sustainability Research Institute at the University of East London. I'm an ecologist by background, working in urban and peri-urban landscapes, researching the design, delivery, and stewardship of nature-based solutions. I'm very grateful for being invited to present my research today. When I was invited, I was asked to present my thoughts on how to design, deliver, and manage green infrastructure, and to present some outputs from one of my projects, Connecting Nature. When I recovered from the enormity of trying to explain all of that in just 20 minutes, I started to think about whether there was, in fact, a simple answer. What occurred to me was that there's been a single theme that has run through a lot of my research projects, and that is the critical importance of communication. Not just any communication, but the right communication necessary for unlocking mainstreaming of nature-based solutions in cities. So I'm going to provide an overview of a few of my recent projects and hopefully convince you of the thread that has run through all of them. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted in relation to the scale of the current challenge. Nature's in crisis. The consequences of this mean that society is facing numerous interrelated global challenges. Restoring biodiversity has been identified as a key mechanism to begin to mitigate and adapt to many of these challenges. And despite recent political change to focus more on growth, competitiveness, and security, there remains a key global focus on moving to a nature-positive future. And nature-based solutions represent a mechanism to get us there. Restoring nature as a direct action responding to societal challenges can provide multifunctional solutions addressing numerous and interrelated challenges, can engage local communities in co-production and co-governance activities to raise awareness of the value of nature, and can represent cost-effective solutions compared to many grey infrastructure alternative solutions. Nature-based solutions come in many forms, from approaches in semi-natural landscapes, such as restoring peat bogs by blocking man-made drainage channels, to restoring habitats or creating novel ecosystems in urban areas. While restoring and protecting nature in our rural landscapes has the greatest direct potential for reversing global biodiversity declines, we also need to be providing spaces for nature to thrive in cities. Reconnecting our communities with the natural world that supports their health and well-being through its ecosystem services. Exploring how to restore nature in urban areas through nature-based solution approaches has become a key focus of my research. Urban nature-based solutions come in all shapes and sizes. Whilst these approaches are gaining popularity, they still tend to be delivered as innovative pilots rather than as an integrated approach to socially just urban planning. A project that I worked on, Connecting Nature, aimed to explore how cities could move from this situation of nature-based solution pilots to one where nature-based solutions are mainstreamed in urban planning. The project was led by Trinity College Dublin and involved partners from across Europe and beyond. It was set up as based on a twinning and clustering approach. We worked closely with 3 frontrunner cities to support them in mainstreaming nature-based solutions through implementing citywide exemplars. The project also included 9 additional fast follower cities who were mentored by the frontrunner cities and other project partners to explore how to replicate the approaches being developed in the frontrunner cities. The concept was to support cities in this scaling journey from one where nature-based solutions were being delivered locally as localized pilots of innovation to one whereby they were embedded citywide, delivering multifunctional benefits by design at multiple and connected scales through new forms of governance built on experiential learning and systems open to innovation. Now, our 3 frontrunner cities took very different approaches to scaling nature-based solutions. In Genk, the local authority team adopted very much a bottom-up community engagement approach to regeneration of the Steamer Valley, a degraded watercourse that runs through the entire centre of the city. The Steamer Valley connects sites of importance across the city and provides opportunities for easy access to nature for a substantial proportion of the city's residents. The bottom-up approach focused on a strong communication and engagement strategy that empowered citizens to take ownership of the regeneration scheme. It generated community support and, more importantly, demand for this transformation. In the project, we worked with the Genk team to develop innovative comms strategies, funding models, and innovative nature-based solution projects along and linking to the Steamer Valley. In Glasgow, the city team focused their activity at a citywide strategic level. A new open spaces strategy was co-developed, providing a strategic focus and direct guidance on a nature-based solutions approach to anyone managing or developing the city's open spaces. This included developing a database to support understanding of local ecosystem service needs, mapping connections between the open space strategy and the city's portfolio of other strategic plans and priorities, developing a nature-based enterprises incubator program, and demonstrating the open space strategy directly through embedding it into existing open space transformation initiatives. In Poznan, the city team adopted a silo-busting collaborative approach with their colleagues in the education department. Collaborative activity focused on transforming a pan-city network of kindergartens from hard, impermeable surface play areas into nature-based play and learning spaces. This included creating open gardens, where parts of kindergarten spaces were shared with local communities outside of kindergarten opening hours. By the end of the project, 46 play spaces had been unsealed and transformed. Project Legacy included transfer of the approach to other educational stages across the city. In the project, us academics shadowed and supported the frontrunner cities with their activities. We implemented a reflexive monitoring process to capture learning in the form of critical turning points, so actions that helped unlock significant progress, and learning objectives, key challenges that needed to be addressed to move forward along the scaling journey. From this, we developed the Connecting Nature framework to support other cities in mainstreaming nature-based solutions. The framework comprised 7 elements that worked iteratively through the planning, delivery, and stewardship phases of nature-based solution implementation and scaling. These elements are technical solutions, so how to design and implement technical aspects of nature-based solutions, including balancing design for people and for nature. Impact assessment, developing robust indicators to evaluate performance and inform adaptive management. Governance, how to bring together key organizations and political and legislative frameworks to underpin nature-based solutions scaling. Co-production, how to design and effectively co-produce processes. Finance and business models, identifying challenges and enablers to financing nature-based solutions and how to secure the financing. Nature-based enterprises, defining what nature-based enterprises are, how they're critical to scaling nature-based solutions, and how to create a supportive environment to help them develop and flourish. And finally, reflexive monitoring, this concept of developing a culture of reflection to understand, learn from, and share progress on the scaling journey. The Connecting Nature project also developed additional resources to support the elements of these guidebooks. This included an enterprise platform, a collaborative community space for nature-based enterprises, the Co-Impact tool, a tool to help individuals select and implement evaluation indicators for nature-based solution projects, knowledge hubs, libraries of resources connected to each of the framework elements, a Sarajevo process, an arts-based engagement process to help local communities to reflect on their connections to nature. And the project also co-led the development of the Evaluating the Impact of Nature-Based Solutions Practitioner Handbook. Of the project innovations, though, perhaps the most successful in terms of moving cities along this journey of scaling nature-based solutions was providing an environment that was conducive to experiential knowledge exchange between the city teams. Within the project, this was achieved through reflexive monitoring, initially through the cities diarying their experiences and working with us, the reflexive monitoring leads, to support and identify key challenges and successes to their scaling. Reflexive monitoring evolved as the project developed, creating an environment where our fast follower cities were connected to and mentored by our frontrunner cities. And finally, where we worked with cities globally to set up local nature-based solution hubs to facilitate knowledge exchange between cities regionally. The nature-based solutions hubs are now part of a global program of nature-based solutions knowledge exchange run through Ecology. The importance of communicating effectively to scale green-blue infrastructure delivery has also been mirrored in other projects I'm working on currently. Bioherbs is a UKRI project funded by NERC and ESRC under a program aiming to improve understanding of the economics of biodiversity. The project research focuses on how to value biodiversity in urban developments and urban areas. It's been delivered by a partnership of UK universities and an architectural practice, Stolon Studios. The project is structured around 4 interconnected research themes: understanding the challenges and opportunities in recognizing and realizing biodiversity in development, evaluating existing spatial planning valuation tools, developing and testing scenarios to understand how biodiversity can be embedded into urban development, and assessing how the process of joint value creation can be supported by making biodiversity more visible. Stakeholder engagement is at the heart of these themes, to explore experiences of how biodiversity is considered and valued in urban developments. In the first theme, semi-structured interviews have been used to develop a better understanding of the costs of delivering biodiversity in new developments. From these discussions, it's been clear that this topic is still very opaque, with very different experiences and substantial gaps in information on the actual costs of design, delivery, and management of blue-green infrastructure. In the second theme, exploring experiences of sustainable development tool use, similar patterns have emerged. A combination of stakeholder engagement and literature review approaches were used to explore and compare practitioner experiences of using a range of tools to support the planning of blue-green infrastructure in urban developments. Emerging results indicate that while some tools are well known and well used, others are relatively unknown, and there is still limited understanding of the complementarity of tools or the extent to which they deliver on different aspects of ecological conservation objectives. Next steps are to develop capacity building resources, including a decision support tool to support users in selecting and using sustainable development planning tools more effectively. The third theme includes using discrete choice experiments to better understand and therefore better communicate to blue-green infrastructure practitioners how individuals value biodiversity, particularly different types of biodiversity, and their willingness to pay for biodiversity enhancements, and where they would like to see these enhancements made in relation to their dwellings and places of work. Research and experiential learning from these three research themes is being fed into a final study that's exploring different approaches to embedding blue-green infrastructure into urban developments. Using case study areas in suburban, peri-urban, and urban centre locations, different greening approaches are being compared in terms of their costs and their delivery against biodiversity net gain, urban greening factor, and green infrastructure framework assessment criteria. Habitat unit cards are being developed to help practitioners navigate the selection of different blue-green infrastructure components when planning development, and to help navigate the lack of standardization in terminology across different tools and frameworks. The EU-funded UNP Plus project, or Urban Nature Plan Plus project, also includes a focus on facilitating more effective communication to drive forward urban blue-green infrastructure delivery. As part of the EU's biodiversity strategy, the European Commission has called on all European towns and cities of at least 20,000 inhabitants to develop ambitious urban nature plans. Plans should include measures to create biodiverse and accessible urban green spaces, including a diversity of green space types. And this ambition has been further consolidated by the newly adopted Nature Restoration Regulation. An urban nature plan framework has already been developed. It includes 10 steps to guide municipalities through the process of developing an urban nature plan. While some cities have made substantial progress, many are struggling to get the necessary political, community, departmental, and/or financial buy-in to drive renaturing at the scale necessary to deliver a socially just approach to urban greening. The UNP Plus project that I'm working on is taking an experiential learning approach to developing and enhancing the UNP framework. Collaborating with city teams from 5 cities across Europe, we're exploring city successes and challenges with developing and implementing urban nature plans. This project includes 2 lighthouse cities, Barcelona and Paris, that have made significant progress with their urban nature plans, and 3 greening cities, Belgrade, Burgas, and Mannheim, that are at an earlier stage of development. The project consortium is developing new capacity building resources to support cities progress with the UNP steps, also connecting cities to existing resources that they're unaware of currently. Capacity building is covering a diverse range of themes and will include a specific focus on governance and policy, embedding into spatial planning frameworks and mainstreaming, financing and collaboration, justice and well-being, and impact evaluation. Similarly to connecting nature, though, reflexive monitoring is being embedded into the project structure and being used to understand city experiences as they develop and deliver their urban nature plans. This has included mapping the baseline state of each of the cities prior to the start of the project and to track change as they engage with capacity building resources. City challenges and successes are being shared through case study reports, and opportunities to connect the cities through urban nature exchanges are being developed based on the synergies identified in the reflexive monitoring process. This includes synergies related to cities sharing a challenge on one of the UNP steps, or where cities have contrasting experiences, with some struggling and others succeeding on the same step. One thing that has emerged from the project communication already is that whilst much experiential learning can be transferable from leading cities like Paris and Barcelona to greening cities, context related to scale and resources can make some experiential learning less relevant. A key learning from this has been the importance of establishing knowledge transfer between cities linked by common scales, resources, planning approaches, and cultural contexts. Lastly, in my whistle-stop tour of projects, I wanted to present the London Strategic SUDS pilot study, a project that has now evolved into the Prosper project. The project involves rolling out small-scale SUDS schemes in 3 inner and 3 outer London boroughs. The project has taken a holistic approach to unlocking the necessary understanding to deliver small-scale SUDS at a catchment-wide scale to control flood risk and provide multifunctional benefits. We were brought in during the SUDS planning and delivery stage to evaluate the impacts of the SUDS projects implemented, monitoring their performance, and generating the evidence needed to unlock broader rollout. What became clear relatively quickly, though, was that there was a substantial variation across the project working group in terms of what evidence was considered vital to capture from the performance of the SUDS schemes to unlock broader rollout. We decided to explore this diversity of perceived need and across more broadly across the SUDS sector. To do this, we developed a practitioner survey to generate an overview of opinions on what the priorities should be for generating evidence on the performance of SUDS, which factors act as barriers, and for which barriers there is a lack of available information. This table presents a list of priorities for generating more evidence to unlock SUDS scaling based on different aspects of the survey outcomes. Similarly to the project working group, responses were wide-ranging and contrasting opinions were recorded on the need for more evidence. To explore this further, we identified the respondents with the most contrasting opinions, so those who perceived the fewest barriers to rolling out SUDS, and those that perceived the greatest number of barriers, and we interviewed them to explore their experiences in more detail. The aim being to try to identify which factors were limiting SUDS scaling and which truly related to a lack of available evidence compared to those factors for which evidence or experience existed, but it just wasn't accessible to all practitioners. This table summarizes the outcome of these interviews with 3 key themes emerging in relation to remaining barriers. One of the key outcomes, though, was that whilst substantial experience exists in the sector, sharing of this information is not always effective, and there needs to be better communication of experiential learning, both in terms of success and failures across the sector to drive wider rollout of SUDS. In response to this, we are now developing a series of SUDS case studies that focus more on the how and the how not, rather than the broader technical aspects of each SUDS scheme. Hopefully, this will help practitioners to unlock broader SUDS rollout. So, in relation to the question I was originally asked for this presentation, how do you design, deliver, and manage blue-green infrastructure? The theme that has hopefully run through most of my project experience and through this presentation has definitely been better communication. So listening to needs, co-creating research questions, providing space for detailed conversations, and sharing experiential learning in a way that's both accessible and actionable to the people that need it. Thanks for listening. And if you want any further information on any of those projects, there's some links in the presentation which is being shared after the event.
Great, thank you, Stuart. That was really interesting. Just to see the scale of the amount of projects you're working on with the citywide and borough, the borough level, and sort of the patterns that emerge and the sort of similar problems you seem to be encountering along them. As I said before, yeah, please keep your questions coming in the Q&A. We'll take them at the end and answer them all together. So that being said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the next speaker as part of this event. That's Professor Laurence Jones from the the UK Centre for Ecology and Hyrdrology. So Laurence, just whenever you're ready, go ahead and share your slides. Thanks.
Thank you, Kieran. Yeah, so I've got slightly shaky Wi-Fi, so RSB are going to share the slides, and hopefully the sound won't cut out. So the title I've posed here is what don't we know about urban natural capital? Or perhaps a different way of framing it is, why do we keep measuring the same things? Next slide, please. So I'll give a bit of framing as to how I'm sort of talking about urban natural capital in this talk. So obviously natural capital is the grass, the trees, the vegetation, the soil under it, the organisms that live in it, the air, all of these things, and the processes that interact among them. So that's in the sort of technical definition of natural capital. In cities, we found it helpful to think about these in terms of types of green space, because natural capital in cities is very fragmented, and usually it falls into discrete types that are owned and managed by different entities in different ways. So the way someone manages their own private garden is very different to the way a street tree is managed, or a park, for example. So in an urban context, I tend to think about things in terms of types, and I'm going to call them green space just because that's easier. But generally, there's a plethora of terms that people describe, and green space, blue space. Green space is a sort of catch-all for both of those. Green infrastructure, and Stuart's framed everything in the context of nature-based solutions. And these have all got slightly different technical definitions, but people tend to use them interchangeably. So I'll probably refer primarily to green space in my talk. I've given just a few pictorial examples here. So parks, street trees, gardens are the obvious ones. Perhaps sort of moving down to the bottom right, you've got the more sort of Cinderella types of green space that people tend not to think about. Things like cemeteries, road verges, along the edge of streets and highways. They probably make up quite a large area of the city in terms of available green space, and they're certainly one of the more flexible in terms of public areas of green space where management can be implemented differently, perhaps. Next slide. Yeah, I've got a few animations on here. Apologies, I forgot to take them off. Yep. Stuart's actually teed this up really nicely with some of the things he was describing. Decision makers managing green space in cities, be they public or private, they need information about how to manage, what to manage, where to manage it. And what sort of I found, and we're going to present here from a bit of an academic perspective, is really some of the problems that arise when you're trying to find information about green space and what it does, what its functions are. So just to put a little bit of a wider context about why this is important, and again, Stuart touched on some of these. So in the UK, we've got the sort of green infrastructure targets to increase neighbourhood green space. He mentioned the EU Nature Restoration Regulation, where towns and cities with more than 20,000 inhabitants need to have very specific targets to increase their green space. So lots of cities in the UK and in Europe and elsewhere have got green plans. So top right, I've given some examples from Aarhus in Denmark, which is one of the cities we worked closely with in the EU Regreen project. So they have very specific targets. They want to put in 10,000 new street trees, 8,000 hectares of new woodland, etc., etc. Some of these are very prescribed. They know exactly what they want to do and where and for what purpose, but they're interested in multifunctionality. Some of them, like the 10,000 street trees, you could argue it's a bit of a number plucked out of thin air, and they don't actually quite know where to put those trees. So key underlying all of this is the need to have robust information about what functions these different types of green space provide. And as a corollary to that, where in the city, if you've got a choice, if you want to put 10,000 new street trees in, where are you going to get the most benefit from that? And thinking about multifunctional benefit across a range of different urban challenges. So that's what sort of driven our desire to try and address this need from an academic perspective. Next slide. So this is another output from the Regreen project. We basically came up with a typology of different types of green infrastructure, green space. So we've been adding to it since then, but in this original version, we had 49 different types, so categories and subcategories, covering. The aim was to sort of get categories that worked with modeling and with quantifying the benefits that they provide. So it's a bit of a mix of land use, land cover, and functional units. So it sort of differs slightly from some existing typologies, which are more driven by data availability, for example. So we put together this matrix of the 49 types, and you can see in the columns, you can't read them, unfortunately, but there's a set of 9 typical urban challenges which cities face. And these span provisioning services. So if you think about things in terms of ecosystem services framing, so food production, a suite of regulating services, so air quality improvement, cooling, water flow regulation, water quality, noise mitigation, and then a series of more sort of people-focused challenges, so improving physical well-being, mental well-being, and enabling space to allow social interaction. And then lastly, because biodiversity is important in all of this, there was a separate strand on improving biodiversity. So we put together this matrix, and this is very much expert driven. So it's driven by an understanding of the underlying ecological processes behind, let's say, air pollution removal. And it's evidenced by the literature where that's available. But it's very much a sort of expert-driven assessment of how important each of these types is at addressing particular challenges. So the darker green is very high. So generally the green space types the trees in tend to be more multifunctional. So you'll see more very highs where there's lots of trees in that green space type, and the kind of pinky color is low, and some of these are negligible. The key challenge we found with this actually was when we were doing this initial review, a sort of rapid evidence review, if you like, we found that a lot of the information was conflicted, and sometimes the information wasn't there. So really this sort of set us on a journey of actually trying to put numbers into each of these boxes, and that sort of drove the next stage of the work. So if we can move to the next slide. So that we took the baton up in the Reclaim network. So this is an urban network plus, which is EPSRC with the lead funder, but NERC, AHRC, other research councils put money into it. So the idea is that because it's a network plus, it can distribute money for targeted activities. So there was some primary data collection in case studies, but we also commissioned a series of evidence synthesis reviews. So we picked 7 key challenges. So carbon stocks, air pollution removal, cooling, noise, water flow regulation, well-being, and insect diversity. So we followed Prisma guidelines to do this. So structured search terms, there's an example there for looking at sea as a natural capital element in coastal towns and cities. So you structure the kind of focus of the challenge, which is urban cities, the kind of pressure, if you like, which is air pollution, different ways of framing that, and then different ways of describing the actual natural capital green space type. And we iterated this through various teams, and there were distributed teams working on each of these synthesis reviews. Next slide. So just a sort of few headline findings, if you like, from that process. So the process is still ongoing. Some of the reviews are published and some we're just sort of finalizing the evidence. So that initial set of hits, and we just use Web of Science for this, that initial set of search terms produced over 200,000 hits across those 7 topics. And this already shows a challenge in terms of the information available to practitioners. So if you're interested in cooling or well-being, you can see that there's lots of studies which mention those. If you're interested in noise or diversity, we focus this on insect diversity. There's far fewer studies. But look at cooling. There's over 65,000 hits. So how do you make sense of that kind of information as a non-academic or a non-specialist? Next slide, please. So when you go through the process of filtering, so for literally all of those 200,000 references, we filtered on title and abstract to remove ones that were obviously not relevant, and then focused on a subset which looked initially relevant, but because we wanted usable data out of these, we then did a further sifting. And out of those 200,000 references, we came up with 3,700 that had usable data in them. So that's about a 2% success rate. So you've got to wade through a lot of material before you can find something that actually puts robust numbers on something. And I'll come back to that robust bit later. So this is across all of the topic reviews, all of the challenge reviews, and it just shows the kind of distribution of green space types which receive the most literature attention and those which receive the least. So at the top, you've got street trees, woodland, parks, green roofs. They receive the most studies in the literature. And then down at the bottom end, there's a whole series missing in the middle, but I'm just focusing on the top 6 and the bottom 6. So down at the bottom end, out of all those studies, only 3 looked at canals, 2 looked at flood control channels. Linear features tend not to be well studied, so things like footpaths, railway corridors, and also utility areas, things like schoolyards, sports fields, etc. So there's a real lack of information on some of these key green space types. And if you think about green roofs, what's the overall proportion of green roofs in terms of actual functional area in a city? It's tiny. Yet it's 4th on the list of studied green space types. So have we got the balance right in terms of which features give the most benefit or have the most coverage in a city? In other words, where can you make the most difference versus the kind of scientific effort spent trying to quantify these things? Next slide. I'll just give a little bit of a flavor from the cooling review. So this was the first one that was published last year. There's a bit of information about sort of geographical distribution. China is producing a vast number of studies. So the majority of studies were from Asia and from Europe, far less from South America and Africa. And arguably those are the areas that might suffer the most in terms of global south impacts of increasing temperatures with climate change. And we need to know more about how green space functions in terms of the type of vegetation that goes into those green spaces and how that provides benefits to people. in those areas, perhaps less so in Europe and the West. In terms of effectiveness, the kind of green space types differ in terms of effectiveness in different climates. So wetlands and parks tend to give the biggest cooling differentials in temperate climates. Green walls and botanical gardens in continental climates, pocket parks and wetlands in arid zones. So this is just a sort of few snippets of findings from that review. There's a lot of detail in there, so if you want to check it out, it's open access, so it's available to anyone. Next slide. Just a little bit of information from the air pollution review. This one's also published. There's most information on the green space types, which are circled in red, so street trees, green roofs. Again, arguably, how much pollution a green roof removes is questionable. Green walls, probably even less surface area of green walls in cities than there is green roofs. Parks, woodlands, and some on woodlands and mixed green space types. Next slide. So I've sort of described the challenge just in wading through this vast amount of information, both in terms of the number of reviews and the balance across different topics. Even when you eventually find papers that have data in there, there are some additional challenges. And I'm illustrating this one in particular because it kind of illustrates some of the dangers of having numbers that you don't understand the context behind how they've been derived. So I'm not actually naming the paper, but the paper claims that hedges remove, and this is very precise, 50.1% up to 99.9% of particulate pollution. So it's a peer-reviewed study. It has a picture of a hedge in the study. And if you can just click on one, yeah. So if you then look into the detail in the methods, you find that they packed perspex tubes of about 8 to 10 centimeters diameter with material from hedges in different packing densities. They piped particulate pollution into one end of the tube and then measured it at the other end of the tube. So I will leave it to you to judge how representative that is of a hedge in a green space setting. I meant to say this earlier, actually. The main mechanism by which vegetation removes air pollution, or I should say reduces air pollution concentrations, there are two main mechanisms for particulates. So one is deposition of particles to leaf surfaces. So the leaf surface area is really important. And trees remove around 10 times as more pollution per unit ground area than grass does because it has a much higher leaf surface area. Hedges are sort of considerably less than trees, but more than grass. So there's direct particulate deposition onto leaf surfaces. And the other mechanism is as a barrier, and that is primarily how hedges work to reduce air pollution concentrations. So the total leaf area isn't that great. So the main mechanism by which hedges remove air pollution or reduce air pollution concentrations is a barrier. You get mixing turbulence behind the hedge with an area with generally lower particulate concentrations in air. So that's useful to understand how relevant this particular study is in terms of removing air pollution. The problem with these kind of numbers is that it's a peer-reviewed paper. Someone does a review. It might be an academic review. It might be a review collating information from a report. They present a range of numbers. This number features in there, 99.9%. Someone else sees that and they cite it. A company, let's say they're, designing planting hedges or they're creating green walls, it's in their interest to market the benefits of green space. They see this number, they put it on their website. and these numbers promulgate, and it creates problems because it's not, I would say this is not a robust study to quantify the amount of pollution that a hedge removes. But these numbers find their way into the kind of, the ether, and they get repeated and repeated. And I think it does a disservice, because green space has many, many co-benefits. And that is one of the strengths of green space, as Stuart illustrated. It tackles lots of things simultaneously, but what it won't do is remove 99.9% of your air pollution. Next slide. So just to summarize, really, in terms of science gaps, I think there are some substantial gaps, despite this huge breadth of available literature. There are some fairly fundamental gaps. Certainly, we need more studies on generally sort of less well-known types of urban natural capital, so particularly linear features, utility areas, so trees in playgrounds, etc. Blue space. Some aspects of blue space are well studied, others less so. Domestic gardens, that didn't feature at the bottom of the list, but given that gardens cover 30 to 40% typically of UK cities, there's a huge area there, and we actually know relatively little about how gardens function in terms of a wide range of different outcomes that green space provides. We need more multifunctional studies. So often studies are focused on a particular issue with a particular green space type. So it's useful to have studies that look at multifunctional outcomes, but actually quantify them from the same unit of green space. And another challenge we came across was that it was very difficult to compare the amount of service delivery from one type of green space compared with another. So we need more studies that compare multiple types of green space using the same methodology, same metrics, same instruments, etc., etc. We also need more meta-analyses. There's a lot of narrative reviews out there. It's quite easy to write a narrative review. You create some search criteria, you narrow it down until you've got a number you think you can deal with using various excuses, and then you do a descriptive summary of the literature. There's hundreds, possibly thousands of studies like that, and I would argue they're not particularly helpful. What is helpful is pulling out data and comparing it in a robust way, because that gives us the numbers that we can use to populate that matrix that I showed earlier. And we need robust design of studies. So generally, if you're looking at a study and the number looks too good to be true, it probably is, but you need to delve into the methods and try and work out what's going on. So as another brief example, we're looking at the carbon stock numbers. So typically, trees in UK cities, there's some variability around this, but it might be sort of 80 tons of carbon per hectare. And we found one study that was quoting 45 tons of carbon per hectare in above ground vegetation for grass. So clearly there's something wrong in that study. There's some sort of assumptions perhaps that aren't quite right, but it's sort of delving into the detail to try and sense check these, and it does take time. But if in doubt, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And then just to conclude this talk with where we're going next, in terms of the reclaim reviews, what we're trying to do is create a database of studies that we've checked, or at least checked the kind of more extreme examples, and it'll probably take us time to iterate and check more as we go. But the outputs from all of those 7 challenges, we're putting the usable data into a database that anyone can access. So hopefully you'll be able to go into there and sort of find studies where you can compare, how does a park perform compared to a grass verge, for example, in terms of air pollution removal. I will stop there. So thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laurence. A timely reminder, there is still work to do in this area. amongst the community. Great. Well, that just leaves us to introduce our final speaker, Ian Houlston, who is a director at the environmental consultancy LDA Design. So a reminder that once Ian has finished talk, we'll go back and we'll start having a Q&A. We'll bring all the speakers back in. So Ian, just whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thanks, Kieran. There we go. That should be sharing.
Yep, we can see fine, Ian. Thanks.
Great stuff. Thank you, Kieran. As Kieran just mentioned, I work at consultancy LDA Design, where we're focused on planning, designing, master planning and delivering large-scale infrastructure, new homes across the country. And over recent years, we've been exploring what we'll talk about today, which is a natural capital approach to placemaking, which I hope is of some interest. We've been looking at this for some time and noticing over the last couple of decades a significant reduction in the quality of placemaking. Placemaking Alliance undertook some research a few years ago, which found that a lot of new development is overwhelmingly mediocre or poor. Part of that is in the architecture, part of that is in the master planning, and part of that is in respect to the landscape and green infrastructure that's delivered alongside the new development, despite best efforts in policy to address that. Policy legislation ever since 2010 has been putting us on a clear trajectory, we believe, into an environment where we're delivering benefits for nature that also deliver benefits for people. And it's really interesting to see how that thinking has evolved from the Lawton Review right the way up to the environmental net gain, environmental benefits of nature tool being referenced in planning practice guidance. So I think we're on a clear trajectory towards what a lot of the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve through all of our professional endeavours. And we just have to keep up with what the policy and legislation says and reflect on what Laurence says, provide the evidence to make the investment decisions we need to see the beneficial outcomes we all want to see happening. For us, the 25-year environment plan was a really good start, and that wanted to expand on net gain approaches used for biodiversity to deliver wider benefits, wider environmental net gain benefits effectively. And this is just a couple of examples of where we're seeing that in policy. The planning policy guidance updated in February refers to wider environmental net gain and reference the environmental benefits from nature tool, and the policy statement for energy EN1 also refers to this as being part of good design. So we've got starting to get the levers to achieve some of the things we're seeking to achieve. And why is it important? Well, we all know this. It's not as a very particularly scientific diagram, but one which I think is quite compelling. We need to get back to a trajectory where nature is recovering, and that's through increased conservation efforts, more sustainable modes of production, more sustainable consumption. But we need to accelerate where we are because our business as usual trajectory is heading very much in the wrong direction. And we've all got a part as citizens and environmental professionals in achieving that rapid turnaround. And challenging the business as usual. And we sort of see now as a really pivotal point in time to challenge the way we work, challenge who we work with, explore working with new types of professional, new consultants who we don't typically work with, and look at different ways of working that focus on outcomes and being very clear about the outcomes we want to achieve, which go beyond mitigation and deliver positive benefits for nature whilst delivering positive benefits for people in the economy. Rather unusually, or rather, this isn't unusual or new, it's just a tool we use to remind ourselves of all of the different benefits nature delivers. So that's the ecosystems wheel that we use in the business to just keep reminding ourselves that this stuff is important, and with the right decisions we can deliver much more advantageous outcomes for the developments we design. And we prepared this couple of diagrams that show the environmental, economic and social benefits that trees, natural vegetation in urban areas delivers: improved recovery time from illness, sense of place, inviting public realm for social interaction, visual screening of development, improved air quality, sense of place, traffic calming, attractive high streets to increase footfall and spending, increase concentration on productivity. Now, picking up on what Laurence says, these are all relatively well-known benefits from nature, but there is the lack of evidence at the granular level to really to support some of this. So I think evidence is increasingly going to be important. And in rural peri-urban environments, the same applies. Same set of environmental benefits derived from nature can be achieved with the right thinking and the evidence to support it, ideally in the future. And just a really simple example, this is an approach to conventional drainage on the left, but if you take a nature-based drainage solution on the right, you deliver many, many more beneficial outcomes if it's designed and planned and implemented and managed effectively. And just picking up on the evidence point, the Environment Agency has published some natural processes evidence directory relatively recently, and I think it's more of this will be beneficial to make the case for the nature-based solutions that we're looking to implement as part of our projects. So what difference does it make? We've been on a bit of a journey in the business, like I said, for the last few years, from the work we did on the Natural Resources Ecosystem Resilience Field Guide, through cracking the code, the RTPI, through some relatively recent master planning projects. And we'll pick up on East Columpton as one example of where we've been trying to work with different consultancies to generate an ecosystems approach to the master planning that we undertake. So East Columpton's the example. And what we did there was take the data and work with a company called Environment Systems to analyse the various ecosystem services derived from the site and its surroundings at the moment, and where the optimal opportunities were to deliver better outcomes for various ecosystem services. So in this case, we just looked at carbon stocks in soils and vegetation. Through their analysis, identify where the better opportunities were for carbon sequestration and storage were on the site. And we ran through various different ecosystem services, including natural flood management, erosion risk, and habitat connectivity, the 3 or 4 different habitat types that were prevalent in the area of our master plan. And what that led to is a slightly different master plan. So I think what we would have delivered if it wasn't embedded in the process. And I think more importantly, an ability to talk differently about what this development could deliver, with a little bit more evidence around carbon sequestration and other natural capital benefits. We've also reflected on the experiences we've had, and I think we could probably all agree that there's a growing recognition that our natural environment is under threat. Climate change, new development, infrastructure, all have the potential to further reduce our natural capital assets. However, it's also potentially the mechanism, development and change is the mechanism to enhance our existing natural capital and deliver new natural capital assets that deliver benefits. And it's up to us, I think, to use good design, good planning process to be the instigators of change. It makes good business sense for us to do that. It makes good sense for our clients. And it makes good sense for us as citizens within society to be really focusing in on this in the way that we plan and deliver new development and infrastructure. And the next generation, Fred, my godson being the example, really understand this and get the process that we're talking about instinctively now. I think increasingly they're recognizing that nature matters, not just for nature, but what it delivers for all of society. So I think we've got an opportunity right now to enhance our approach to placemaking, planning and design, an approach that allows us to confidently deliver environmental outcomes needed to mitigate, adapt and build resilience to climate change and help nature recover. And I think this will go beyond traditional mitigation of impacts and offsetting, and it will enhance our mission to build and maintain beautiful new development and infrastructure. We've been developing an approach. It's not right, it's just a start for 10, but we thought we'd share that with you today just as our initial thoughts on what the process could look like or could be refined in the future. So we start by defining a study area, recognizing that no development ever sits in isolation. Socially, environmentally or economically, every piece of infrastructure or housing sits within a context. And it's part of the process to consider the context when understanding how a development might change that landscape and that environment, but also how that landscape and that surrounding environment could support that new development. Part 2 is to, for that area around and within a development site, map the natural capital assets and the ecosystem goods and services that flow from these. And then model climate change scenarios to identify the potential effects, because we should be planning, designing and delivering development that's for the very near and medium term and long-term future where climate change is going to have a significant impact. We need to be future-proofing what we do so it's resilient and is cognizant of the significant changes that we're now predicting in terms of more energy storm events, high energy storm events, increased urban heating and increased rainfall. All of those things we need to be designing for very overtly now. We want to and need to engage different environmental specialists in the process, not just to take the reports that they produce and the evidence that they provide, but also engage them creatively in design. Design is a process where lots of parties should have an input, and we think environmental specialists, ecologists and people like Laurence who have an understanding of the evidence should be informing the design to make design very much more focused on clear outcomes. And to optimize the outcomes through trade-offs, they need to be around the table to make that decision making more robust and transparent. None of this matters if it can't be delivered. So we need to find routes to delivery for all of the good interventions that we make, and also identify how governance and stewardship of natural capital assets will happen in the long term, and building in the capacity to evolve that management and maintenance to respond to changing circumstances. And really importantly, we need to be much more effective in measuring the outcomes of the interventions we make, record the scenario testing, the outcomes, and over time monitor what our interventions have delivered compared to what we thought they would, and build a much better database of information to inform decisions in the future. And for us, communication is really important. How we sell effectively our ideas to communities and local planning authorities and decision makers and developers is really important. And we use plans and narrative and visualizations to do that. And I think increasingly it will be important for that information to be underpinned by really credible evidence, avoiding too complex terminology, making it accessible, but everything we do should really be informed by evidence going forward. Not currently mandated, so none of this really has to happen in the way that we probably all like it to. some of the questions we get asked is, isn't this what you do anyway? What extra will it add to my project? It's not required in policy or legislation. How much will it cost? All good questions. And I think it's up to us as built and environmental professionals to think very carefully about that and integrate it where we can effectively into our projects. We can make the case for being part of a positive development narrative. It may help reduce the risk of delivering a project, and it can also demonstrably, hopefully, show how a new community or piece of infrastructure will be resilient to climate change. Some outcomes-led approaches maybe also be relevant for some clients because of a corporate strategy or how they undertake integrated reporting. But I think it's up to us, like I say, to find ways to integrate all of this sort of new thinking as best we can into practical planning, design and implementation. And that is the end of the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. That was really interesting and a really nice perspective on both the policy, but also how we can perhaps tackle some of those problems. We'll open it up to a Q&A now. So if I could just invite Stuart and Laurence to cameras on, we'll open up to a few questions. So please keep those coming in the Q&A and we'll answer them as they come in. I think to start off with, we've had a lot of talk about I suppose what the evidence gaps are and maybe what of some of the problems in getting this actually implemented is in terms of private businesses taking it up, for example. It would be interesting to hear your perspectives on what you found is the level of public support for these things. So thinking of like the people who will actually be using this, obviously people want to have these green spaces and these benefits, but are there reservations over things like costs of some of these ecological schemes or nature-based solutions? Do people have reservations about that? So Stuart, if we start with you, like what from your experience, are there any sort of issues or things that need to be overcome in that area?
So in my experience, public support for nature-based solutions is incredibly high. So when I work on my greening projects, generally the biggest push and the biggest desire, the biggest ambition comes from the local communities who want healthier and more biodiverse spaces to live. I think you look at something like, so recently there's a referendum in Paris. I think it was like a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. So in Paris, they're focusing on greening streets. So they've converted 100 of their car-dominated roads into pedestrian green streets. There's quite a lot of expense associated with that, but they've done it particularly around schools, and the messaging has been really clear as to why they've done it and how they're creating healthier, better places for people to live. And they just gave the Parisian public the opportunity to vote on doing that to another 500 streets, to have car traffic completely removed and to be greened. And there's probably some specific factors at play in Paris. So it's a very dense city, car ownership isn't enormously high. But undoubtedly, the political landscape has been a key factor. So the referendum went through, the public voted that they want another 500 streets done, and there's really clear kind of messaging from the very highest political level that of the positives of this kind of approach and that the investment that they want to do in this type of approach. And it comes from the mayor and it comes through the whole of the team. And I think when that messaging is clear from the top and when that public support is clear from the bottom, you can really drive change in relation to the large-scale greening of cities.
Laurence, did you have anything to add to that point?
Yeah, just perhaps some reflections from a small study we did in partnership with Bangor University in Rhyl, which is it's a sort of faded Victorian seaside holiday town. Lots of social problems, not great green space use and coverage at the moment, and Denbighshire County Council have been wanting to do various schemes. So that includes some tree planting work and wildflower verges in the town. And we sort of conducted an online questionnaire and coupled with in-person, face-to-face sort of semi-structured interviews. And both of those actually showed overwhelming public support for more greenery, more trees, more wildflower verges. So overwhelmingly, something like 70% of all people surveyed wanted more green space, more quality green space. But it was interesting that the semi-structured interviews sort of threw up the kind of the vocal, but it was very much a vocal minority who didn't want more trees because they created a mess, or so the sort of usual arguments you hear against trees and things, that illustrated to me the fact that actually most people do want more green space. And when you get these sort of negative stories, it's probably held by quite a small minority of the population, but they do tend to be quite vocal. So we need to bear that in mind when we're thinking about new schemes. And the sort of examples that Stuart's given from Paris, sort of, that's a great illustration of how a combination of top-down and bottom-up support actually helps achieve change.
And if we could get your thoughts as well, that would be good. I mean, it ties into another question we've received here as well, that have you found any aversions beyond that, if there were any? Also, there's talk of like the threat of increased disease transmission or phobias of insects, etc., that people associate with more green space. Have you found any of that in any of the work you've done?
Not specifically on on that. What I have observed is a degree of skepticism in the public. I think we have an inheritance of several decades of poor delivery, and just returning to the first slide I showed, all over the country we see housing and infrastructure developed that is poorly designed, poorly thought through, poorly implemented, and poorly maintained. So when we come in as professionals and demonstrate what good could look like, there's skepticism in our ability to deliver that. I think people do understand the benefits, as Stuart and Laurence have just been talking about, and certainly around the health and well-being agenda. I think part of the problem we've got is making the case for the investors in the wider green infrastructure implementation that we could deliver through flooding. And there's a lot of talk around insurance companies. We know what concrete's able to do. We've seen and observed how that functions over 2,000 years since the Romans introduced it. We just don't have the evidence to make the case always for green infrastructure interventions. And there's the issue around maintaining the green infrastructure to deliver, and concrete performs. You look after it, it delivers. You've got to manage green infrastructure because it's living, so that costs money in a different sort of way. So I think we're on a journey, and I think our acceptance and need for this sort of stuff is being recognised. It's just up to us as professionals to make the case for its use.
And on that point about flooding and the need to maintain green infrastructure as opposed to things like concrete, obviously you said there's a bit of an evidence gap there. Is there also other channels already established there with, I'm thinking, tying into like the insurance community, like insurance companies and the building community and stuff? Are the links there? So, because they're obviously going to be critical in sort of that, in flood prevention, but also when infrastructure is developed that could be prone to flooding, you need to have these people on board, right? So are those channels of communication there? Are they sort of aware of the evidence and the evidence gaps? Stuart, perhaps we start with you.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe Laurence is on to answer around the evidence gaps around flooding, but certainly from my experience, I mentioned the LSSPS project, and one of the things that came out as bottom in terms of more evidence needed was the flood performance of natural solutions to flooding. So there's a huge amount of evidence out there. I think there is a challenge in relation to that kind of guaranteed performance. So quite often we're looking for a kind of put a figure in a box like an engineering approach of a guaranteed performance, and it can be harder to do that with natural solutions, which can create issues around kind of investment and large scale investment. But in my experience, in answering your question more directly, that those discussions are happening, and in fact, the insurance industry are very keen to be investing in this area and have large amounts of money that want to invest. And what tends to be the challenge, especially in urban areas, is that the scale of investment that they need to do is very different to the scale of the projects that are being delivered. So it's very hard to package lots and lots and lots of small projects together in a big parcel at the scale that the kind of large finance and insurance industry want to invest in. But my experience is the conversations are happening, and it's trying to find ways to make those investments feasible for the people that are wanting to do that investment.
Do you find the same thing, Laurence and Ian? Or Laurence, perhaps start with you.
Yeah, I'm sort of not so familiar with how, the insurance industry, for example, engages with this, but just to pick on a few other elements of that question, if you've got a very, very heavy rainfall, intensity rainfall event, sort of 1 in 1,000 year or 1 in 100 year, being realistic, nothing's going to stop that. So you need to sort of design your drainage systems to cope with that as best as possible, but green infrastructure on its own isn't going to solve that challenge. Locally, it can make quite a big difference. So again, just sort of touching on some of the work we've done with Aarhus, the local, I can't remember what the sort of the water company organization is that deals with that aspect of flooding, but they've done quite a few different local schemes where there's been sort of consistent flooding problems during heavy rain for certain parts of the housing in the city, and so they've spent many millions addressing that by a combination of improving the below ground drainage network, but also using the green space and the parks nearby to manage that, and creating sort of retention basins within a park. So there's green infrastructure above it. It's providing biodiversity benefits. It looks nice. It's providing well-being benefits. But that's coupled with the sort of improved underground storage and drainage network, which is concrete. So it's a hybrid system, but it works much better than just a concrete channel and a big kind of concrete sided pond. So there are, again, it's a sort of multifunctional benefits and doing things in ways that are sufficient to address the challenge. And if I could just add one last little bit on that, is that when we did that first evidence review, that we found that most of the evidence around the effectiveness of some of these solutions in terms of water flow management, they were very targeted to a single issue, and most of the green infrastructure solutions, if you like, or the hybrid solutions, things like permeable paving, are still very focused on that single flood risk issue. So there's an element to which I think, collectively as a society, as academics, as industry, we could probably do more to make that more multifunctional, sort of think about that problem in a slightly wider context.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ian, you're nodding. Is it? Do you have any other points? Do you agree with what's been said so far?
I agree with everything Laurence says always. So I think there's a sort of duality to the way we can work. There's something much more sophisticated around integrated thinking, the spatial scale at which we operate. We can be addressing flooding where it happens, but also at a much bigger scale, addressing the issues further upstream and using land use change much more effectively and not on a piecemeal basis. So that's something more sophisticated, and much more simply, we can not build on the floodplain. Floodplains are called floodplains because they flood. And increased building that we've seen on floodplains is just asking for trouble because it just moves the problem around, etc., etc. So the way the planning systems go and the way the Environment Agency have evolved are all pointing towards us achieving these sorts of outcomes. There's a really delicious sort of parallel problem in some parts of the country where there isn't enough water. So whilst we're addressing flooding and storm events and communities having too much water at times, we've got the other problem of the east of England and some parts of the southeast of England not having enough water. So at the same time, we've got to hold water on the land and also get rid of it in some way. So like I say, there are some simple things we can be doing better and also much more sophisticated things that we could be doing around the way water is addressed in the country.
Yeah, it really shows the importance of that sort of holistic approach, doesn't it? Just as not a one-size-fits-all system. Okay, we've got our next question from Claire at Forest Research. This is for you, Laurence. The typology paper you said very high for noise in riparian woodlands. In your opinion, does the flow of water noise in that area account for that very high noise that needs mitigation by associated woodland when you compare it against like road traffic noise, for example? Like, is that one of the drivers of the noise in that area, do you find? And does that need to be mitigated when you compare it to things like road noise?
Yeah, the typology, so it was expert driven. So but this isn't about the intensity of the pressure. This is about the per unit area ability of each green space type to address those pressures. So the reason we gave a high functional performance score, if you like, to riparian woodland was it did actually sort of take into account the moving water element. So, you know, moving water acts as a masking sound, so that can help mask out road noise, for example. And the trees themselves provide a bit of a filter to road noise as well. So the leaves in canopies scatter high frequencies, and the soft ground underneath the trees and the trunks are more effective at dealing with lower frequency noise.
Right, that makes sense. Thanks. So when we think about those sort of different types of infrastructure, I think you highlighted, Laurence, about there are different levels of effectiveness, and thinking about we need to balance sort of how effective a certain part of green infrastructure is, both in terms of, well, cooling or increasing biodiversity, whatever it is, but also public access. How do we balance those two things? So, for example, if you said like grassland may be less beneficial, but is much more accessible for people to actually use, how do we balance those two things of like, with protected areas without public access might have greater levels of biodiversity, for example? How do we sort of find the balance between those different things to kind of get outcomes that help the community and improve community access, but also have quite a significant environmental benefit? Perhaps, Ian, if we start with you on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to introduce the term environmental infrastructure. It's a term I use instead of green infrastructure, just to highlight that it's more than green, it's blue, it's everything, and it puts it on the same level as other forms of infrastructure. And when we design those other forms of infrastructure, we make trade-offs. And I think it's about the trade-offs. It's about identifying what outcomes we seek to achieve, what the priorities are for a particular community or area, and then focusing on them. Have those discussions with all of the stakeholders and experts around the table, not necessarily all at the same time, but discuss what our priorities are, what outcomes we want to achieve, and then the trade-offs that we need to sort of balance to deliver. Recognizing that design is an iterative and integrated process and not just the role of one person. It needs lots of people to engage. And then also realize that what we deliver isn't fixed. The beauty of an environmental infrastructure is that it can adapt over time. So we need to, like I said in my 7 steps, we need to build in the mechanisms for governance of those assets to flex and change to meet different demands. And public access is just one of several things where you add it into the mix and end up with the outcomes, but by no means is anything fixed in the natural environment. It can evolve and adapt, and that's about governance and the ongoing conversation around what we want to achieve.
And Stuart, would you have anything to add to that? Do you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think Ian's absolutely spot on. And the one thing I would say, I think Ian's kind of already mentioned this, Laurence has already mentioned this, is the critical part of kind of data in that process and really kind of understanding what the local needs are, what can be delivered by green infrastructure interventions, and really kind of using data to understand what those opportunities are. I think that the London Green Infrastructure Focus Map is a really excellent example of that. So it's this idea of kind of you divide a city down into a series of hexagons. For each of those hexagons, you look at what the key kind of challenges are. Is it a nature deficit? Is it air pollution? Is it flooding? And then you can use that data when a development comes forward to ensure that the infrastructure that you're putting in is balancing those kind of trade-offs and meeting those local needs. And I would say, so the other thing I'd maybe add to that is also a little bit more about innovation. And this is probably kind of Ian's area of expertise. But I think to some extent, there is this kind of belief that it has to be an either or, and it's always a trade-off. And the biggest one is, do you design for people or for nature? But there's lots of fabulous kind of innovators out there that are looking at really innovative ways to embed both, to make spaces that function for people, but also function for nature at the same time. So I think innovation is critical to help actually get the maximum value and reduce some of the trade-off decisions that need to be made.
And Laurence, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, that sort of tees really nicely to the sort of thoughts I was going to share. So in that initial typology review we did, we found that the multifunctionality for the sort of more typical regulating services sort of range from the more single focus hydrology focus green space through to more multifunctional ones, and generally that involves more trees and more diverse green space. But we found that was actually independent of the sort of social and well-being benefits. So what that suggests is that you can, for any type of green space, you can manage it to improve well-being for people and public access and things. So, for a park, you can put in, toilets, benches, flat areas for kids riding their bikes or people pushing prams, whatever. You can design that social benefit to a large extent independently of the type of green space. So that does give you the option to have the win-wins. And then sort of thinking perhaps a bit bigger picture and drawing from ideas of conservation, really, is that, you don't have to, again, it doesn't have to be a trade-off between biodiversity or one use case compared with another. If you think big and large spaces, you can zone. But if you've got lots of smaller spaces, you can cover a range of needs by focusing on different needs in different pocket parks, for example. You don't have to design them all exactly the same way. So you can think about things in a bigger spatial context, which Ian alluded to earlier. So you can sort of build these ideas into how we provide for the needs of residents of the city.
Great. Okay, we're nearly out of time. If I could just wrap up with one final summary question, probably a difficult one, really. If you could keep it in a short summary point, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges in this space as we sort of move forward? Do you think it's primarily, I suppose, thinking about economic costs are going to increase, or we might have like different land use needs, or change specific environmental threats that you're going to play the most importance in the future space? What, if you had to summarize, what do you think is going to be the most pressing issue we're going to have to deal with in infrastructure development in this area going forward? So Stuart, perhaps if we start with you on that one.
Yeah, just that little question. So for me, global economic uncertainty and global security, I see are already kind of having a real kind of impact on the direction that we're going in terms of the political direction. There seems to be a real kind of very rapid move back towards this idea of kind of guaranteed return on investment in the form of growth, investing in grey infrastructure projects. So you're already hearing kind of messaging to our environmental protection agencies that, you know, not to block development, and this a move back to a kind of terminology that where nature gets in the way and it's something to be moved and not get in the way. And for me, that's really problematic, because for me, the direction we were going in was much more about this idea that protecting the natural environment is a foundation of healthy growth and livable communities. And you're seeing the same kind of thing at an EU level. The language has moved away from kind of green deals and nature-based solutions to growth and security. There's clearly a need to plan for short-term crises, but it can't be done at the expense of long-term sustainability. If we wait for the right time to invest in nature, there's never going to be a right time, because the consequences of climate change and biodiversity crisis are just going to exacerbate these the problems that we're trying to address through restoring nature.
And Laurence and Ian, if I could ask you both very briefly, do you share the same sentiment, or?
I had a list of 3, and that was kind of one of them. So I'll come up with a different one, and I think it's perhaps both a challenge and an opportunity. So some of our infrastructure is quite old, you know, so some concrete buildings are starting to degrade, etc. So, and you know, we've had perhaps a lack of investment in our capital infrastructure over many decades. So I think there's a challenge there, in that some of our sort of grey infrastructure is starting to need increased maintenance, but that perhaps gives opportunities to think about things in a different way, and to make more of this idea of incorporating green and blue infrastructure solutions.
And Ian?
I'll just take a slightly different perspective, although I agree with both previous speakers, and reflect on my little godson Fred again. The next generation are really thinking about this sort of stuff. It's our generation that's stuck in old ways of thinking and doing. The way we perceive what good and successful green places look like is because they're convivial and things like that. With education of society around the absolutely urgent moves we need to make around nature recovery, climate resilience, and health and well-being, we will drive demand for better outcomes. And through that driven demand, the policymakers, the decision takers, the investors will all respond, because we are the voting public. So I think we have a role in educating communities around what quality and good looks like, and engage them in the process about managing and valuing their green infrastructure, their environmental infrastructure much more, because the next generation will. We just need to keep pace with that next generation.
Brilliant. Yeah, very well said. All right, that just about brings us to the end of this event. So thank you again, Stuart, Ian and Laurence, for those really interesting talks and for your engaging answers in the Q&A. We really appreciate it. We've got our next NCI event coming up on the 1st of July. There'll be a link to that in the holding screen at the end on emails about the idea of regenerative agriculture and the impact of that on biodiversity. And there'll be a survey being circulated after this event to get your feedback and what future events you'd like to see. So with that, thanks. I wish you all a great afternoon, and thanks for coming along. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.